Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate you being with me so very, very much. Pardon me. Here we are. We're approaching July. We are approaching the 4th of July. The year is half over. Holy mackerel. Incredible. And by the way, I want to take just one brief moment here. Uh, I want to say a very, very special thank you to all of those of you who support our ministry financially. You know, we've got folks who support our ministry from $5 and up. And we don't have anybody supporting our ministry in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, by the way. But nonetheless, we've had that in the past. But it doesn't matter. I just want you to know how much we appreciate your support. We can't do this ministry without you, okay? I had somebody accost me the other day, that's the only word I know to use, on the internet, talking about getting rich selling books. Well, I can tell you those people who make that accusation don't know the first thing. They're absolutely ignorant when it comes to such claims. They have no idea. I can assure you, I'm not getting rich selling books. Just absolutely not. I'm not even, you know, how should I express that? My book sales do not pay the bills. Your support pays the bills. All right? I wish it were different, and it's growing, no question about it. Last year was better than the year before, better than the year before. But the book sales do not pay all of our bills. That's just simply the facts. So, once again, whether you support us $5, $10, $15, $20 a month or more, it just doesn't matter. I just want you to know how much we appreciate it. You know, we are not one of those ministries that brings in tens of thousands of dollars every single week. We don't bring in tens of thousands of dollars a month. We would like to. We could expand our ministry even more. So if you've got an idea and if you've got the capability to support our ministry, please do so. But that's not the point of today's comments. Today's comment is strictly and solely to say thank you to all of you who support our ministry to whatever extent that you do. All right? We appreciate that. Okay, now I want to continue our study. The last of Israel's feast days, Sukkot. We will get to Shemini Atzeroth, but Sukkot is the feast of harvest. It was the feast of the ingathering. It foreshadowed the resurrection, thus the end of the age and the coming of the Lord. All right? And so in that sense, since the charismata, the miraculous gifts, were to end at the day of the Lord, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 4-8, that means that the miraculous gifts of the Spirit, the cessation of those gifts, is tied up, inseparably so, with the fulfillment of Sukkot. Now, we could discuss the fruitfulness concept, but here is harvest and the end of the age at the coming of the Lord. That is Sukkot being fulfilled at the end of the age. And Sukkot, the end of the age, is the time of the end of the miraculous gifts. Well, I've shared with you a lot of thoughts here on 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And Paul said, when that which is perfect is come, that the miraculous gifts would pass away, tongues would cease, prophecy would fail, not because it would not be fulfilled, it would no longer function. In our last program on this subject, we talked about Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy. And as I point out in my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy, I've actually written 2 books on Daniel chapter 9. And in both of these books, I demonstrate that the 70 weeks was the time determined by God to bring all prophecy to fulfillment. In our last video on this, we looked at Revelation chapter 10, that in the sounding of the 7th trumpet, the mystery of God spoken by the prophets would be completely fulfilled. And that's the time of the resurrection. Well, I don't know of anyone who doesn't agree that all prophecy would be fulfilled at the time of the resurrection. So here is Revelation saying, pardon me, here's Revelation saying that all prophecy, the vision of the Old Covenant prophets, would be fulfilled in the sounding of the 7th trumpet, but the 7th trumpet would sound at the time of the destruction of the city, quote, where the Lord was crucified. That's pretty clear cut. It agrees with Zechariah chapter 13 that we've already examined. I won't go into it. But in the day of the destruction of Jerusalem, the Lord said, I will cause the evil spirit and the prophet to perish out of the land. Cessation of the miracles at the judgment of Jerusalem. Okay. So today I want us to look at the phraseology and terminology found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Now we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. And then Paul says that would be at the time of the face to face. And so many commentators, especially the charismatic commentators, say, well, the face to face is that time in which we enter heaven. I've had some people, charismatics, contact me recently and say, well, okay, the Lord came, but the gifts were not supposed to end at the day of the Lord. The gifts would end at the time of the face-to-face, and that's when we as individuals enter heaven. Well, Paul was not saying that the individual ability to perform miracles would end when that person died and went to heaven. He is talking about the objective state of the face-to-face that would result in the cessation of the miracles, the performance of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Now, I promised you that we would do an exegesis of Isaiah chapter 52. Well, why is that? The reason for that is very, very simple. And what we need to do is we need to understand some basic facts. I said this early on in this particular study. Whatever the state of the face-to-face would be, it would be in fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. That's axiomatic. You know, I shared with you last Friday, as I continued to respond to Mr. Charles Tingler. Mr. Charles Tingler said, well, Acts chapter 17, 30 and 31 cannot be AD 70 because it doesn't mention, specifically, AD 70, the temple, Jerusalem, the destruction. And so for Mr. Tingler, because those things are not specifically mentioned, Paul can't be talking about resurrection as the promise made to Israel. And he could not be saying it would be fulfilled in AD 70. Well, that's a logical fallacy. It's known as the negative fallacy, which says just because certain words, terms, and phrases are not used in any given text, that it cannot be speaking of the same thing as a text that does use those constituent elements. Well, that's honestly ridiculous, and I'm not being unkind here. I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way whatsoever. But to suggest that a writer or speaker must mention every single constituent element associated with a given subject every time he mentions that subject, or else he can't be speaking of that subject. I mean, honestly, that's the epitome of illogic. Very, very quickly, let me point this out, and then I'll get into Isaiah 52. And good grief, I've already talked for 11 minutes here. But look, just because 1 Corinthians chapter 13 doesn't specifically mention the hope of Israel or the end of Israel or AD 70 or Jerusalem or the destruction of the temple, doesn't mean that does not lie in the background. Okay? So let me illustrate the fallacy of taking that position. And I've had a lot of people do that. No, Don, 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is not talking about AD 70 because that's never mentioned. Well, let's see about this. Acts chapter 1, this same Jesus who was taken up from you shall come in like manner as you have seen him go. Okay. People tell us, okay, hey, that is the same time and the same event as the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15. Well, wait a minute. Let's apply this negative fallacy concept. Where do you find the subject? Where do you find the word? Where do you find the idea of resurrection in Acts chapter 1? It ain't there. It's not mentioned. By the way, the coming of the Lord is not mentioned in Acts chapter 17. But Mr. Tingler, I am sure, believes that the coming of the Lord is found in Acts chapter 17, even though the terminology is not found. Do you see the problem here? I mean, you can just go through the New Testament and you can say, well, this passage doesn't mention 4 elements that are mentioned over here in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And this passage over here doesn't mention the earth burning up of 2 Peter chapter 3, etc., etc. So the point I'm making here is that even though Paul does not mention the end of the age, he does not mention the coming of the Lord, even though he does not mention the age to come, even though he does not mention several constituent elements of eschatology, doesn't mean that 1 Corinthians 13 is not eschatological. And just because he doesn't say the face-to-face is the hope of Israel found in the Tanakh, doesn't mean that's not what he's talking about. This is critical to understand. So, let me close today, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but let me close today by simply pointing out that in 1 Corinthians, Paul is talking about the face-to-face, right? Got that? Well, in Isaiah chapter 52, and I'm going to be going through the text more extensively. In Isaiah chapter 52, what does it say? Look at verse 7 and following. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace, who brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation, and says to Zion, our God reigns, or your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices, they shout joyfully together, for they will see with their own eyes when the Lord restores Zion, Break forth, shout joyfully together, your waste places of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Now, this is a New American Standard, and it does not convey the sense of the text as given in the majority of translations that says in verse 8, they will see face to face. Now, since Paul said his eschatology, Paul said his gospel was nothing but that found in the Tanakh, and he was anticipating the arrival of the face to face, and Isaiah spoke of the time of the arrival of the face to face, the eye to eye, if you please. How would we say that Paul wasn't talking about Isaiah 52? What we're going to do tomorrow is examine this terminology. Before we dig deeply into Isaiah 52, we're going to examine this terminology of face to face and its covenantal significance. So I'll see you on the flip side.